Is this thing working? Can you hear me at the back? Okay, sweet. Put your hand up if you do testing. You should all put your hands up. You should all be testing what you build. Even if it's informally or indirectly, everyone tests things. You wouldn't really want to push code without even seeing it compile. The act of compiling is running a test. Anyway, there's my rant for the day. I'm a tester at EPAM. I started a new job 4 weeks ago. I'm contracted out to a client. Because this is recorded, I officially can't say who that client is, but I help test an app that you could use for navigation. Anyway, I'm going to get into it. I built this robot in my last company at Tyro Payments, so I guess they're also competing with CBA and Westpac and whatnot, but at least in the business banking area. So I come from finance and recently moved. So this robot, I had a competition to name it during a hackathon. The name that won was Tappy McDuckface. So I was going to start with a little bit of theory first, but I thought I'd jump straight into the fun part first, the robot, and then if I get to the theory later, I will, but I know I'm a bit restricted on time, so I probably won't get that far. So I'm going to give you a demo first. Let me escape out of that one. And we have some code to run. And I am going to put this camera and turn it around so you can hopefully see. I have a keyboard app on my phone. So hopefully, lost the signal. Where are we? I'm going to able to watch. Oh, there we go. It just came out there.
Is there any IT people in the room?
Oh, yeah. Oh, there we go. There we go. We're back on. We're back on. And I'm going to go up here. Oops, we got a wrong button there. Okay, I think that robot probably needs a bit of some music lessons, but I also taught it how to play this tune that you might recognize. Oops, we lost it. Okay, there we go. You can see there are a couple of timing issues and it's not quite perfect, but it was built in a couple of days to demonstrate how you can use robots to interact with mobile devices. So a bit more context, it's actually an open source project. I'm going to walk over this side out of the projector and flick through on this side because I don't like standing behind podiums. It's a very walled experience. So you can download the source code to run it. It's based off a design built by Jason Huggins. He's the founder who started the Selenium framework, which you use for mobile automation as well. You can see an earlier version of this robot playing or attempting to play Angry Birds as well. So I'm using version 2, this is more version 1. All the parts are generally 3D printable. We got a 3D printer at Tyro to give away at a conference, and we were hacking around playing with the 3D printer before we took it to the conference. So all the green parts were printed in my previous company. The larger parts were printed at a hackerspace. It took about 20 hours to print, and my first print stuffed up a little bit. So Note to self, do not place prints close to the edges because they'll look like they're going fine. You come back in the morning and they're completely not what you expected and you have to reprint. Especially if you've got a bit of calibration issues. And the larger parts were laser cut and my projections. So the bases and the sides were a bit too large for our printer, but they were pretty easy to laser cut. And it was actually at a hackerspace called Robots and Dinosaurs. If you ever get a chance to go out and check there, I think your first visit's generally free. Free promotion. Yeah. It uses an Arduino and 3 servo motors to control. There is already a library that converts rotation into XYZ coordinates. It uses magnets and ball bearings for the joints to get that fluid movement. They all actually come apart, and I'll pass some around. Comes apart for easy transport. So I'll pass 2 down this one. They've got ball bearings. You can actually just take the ball bearings off and they're snapped back on with magnets. Cool. It took about 2 days worth of build time. Spent a day in a hackerspace, 2 afternoons after work assembling it. We also hacked the cost approximately $300 in parts. If I was using an American recipe, which was linking mostly to American providers. Now that I've built it once, I could probably use Australian providers because I know what parts I'm looking for now. So I could probably get that cost a little down. But I've personally spent more on hobbyist electronics as well. So some people think it's expensive, but when you look at how much a basic Arduino kit can set you back, it's roughly some ballpark. So. And we hacked that play piano in about a day and a half. So it wasn't actually too hard to get up and running. I thought it would take more time to calibrate, but really we just mapped the XYZ coordinates of all the keys, passed it into a string that could convert it to music, and we had a robot that could play the piano. And I've never really done a serious Arduino project before. I've bought Arduino robotics kits and whatnot before, plugged them in, got an LED to switch on and off, and then it was like, well, what next? So I don't come from a huge Arduino experience, and we got this up and running fairly quickly. It runs a standard Fermata protocol on the Arduino that allows you to write code or execute code from your machine across. And I'm actually running a Node JavaScript server on my machine, and that Fermata protocol translates that to assembly or machine code on the Arduino. I don't know how it works, it's just magic. I just know how to plug it in. I feel like that's what a lot of technology is like. You just want to get it to work. It also uses a JavaScript API called Johnny 5. It doesn't have a full amount of JavaScript capability, so if you're used to JavaScript and doing timing issues a certain way, this might limit you in that. It's fairly new on the scene, only been around for about 3 years, but it's gaining some popularity. You can even buy a dedicated Arduino-like kit now that can run JavaScript locally. It's like a Raspberry Pi, but it's not as complicated. It's not a whole Linux machine. It's basically an advanced Arduino that runs JavaScript natively. And so those are our keys mapped to XYZ coordinates. Up the top you can see I'm mapping F4 with a pressed and lifted XYZ. And that's because we try to move to the lifted phase before we move to the pressed phase, because if you don't do that, we get some curved motions and accidental keys get knocked and it doesn't sound so good. But then we just map those keys to strings and turn those strings into some sort of representation of music. So I don't know if you come from a music background, but we're using the numbers to represent the length of a note. So 4F3 is play the note F3 for 4/16ths of a bar, because we're assuming 4/4 timing, and anything more than that gets a bit more complicated. And also this robot doesn't care about 4/4 timing. We also use the S here to represent a sharp key on the keyboard as well, and we've just mapped that to a slightly different coordinate. as well. So there's a brief introduction to music as well. How could this help you test? It was hard to justify the practicalities of this. This was just a fun thing to experiment with. I think if you wanted to set up some sort of performance testing over time where you're hitting the same key over and over again, this could be an easy enough rig to set up. If you're relying on robots though for your UI automation, it's going to be prone to a lot of error. There's already frameworks that do UI automation for you, and what was I saying? Okay, UI frameworks, they're kind of known to be flaky, and you have to invest a bit of time in getting them to work properly. So with the extra variation of hardware is going to introduce more flakiness. So I don't recommend relying on this for your core UI automation. Maybe doing long-term performance testing on real devices. A lot of the tools use just simulators and emulators, and they're not quite the same. Technology is getting better, so they are getting closer to testing on real devices, but there's still some issues you might only see on devices rather than simulators and emulators. And it would be just cool to see a whole row of these robots doing all this testing on all these different devices at some point. Maybe I'll get to introduce them at work. My lessons learned when I built this robot was the instructions to build were pretty hard to find. There were instructions for version 1 in the GitHub repository. The instructions for version 2 were based off the DIY website, and the parts didn't quite match up the build instructions. So I printed too many parts, and I ordered not enough bolts, and had to go back to the hardware store. I was trying to use the nuts and bolts recommended in the recipe, but it being an American project, they're all in inches, and I now know what threads per inch on a nut means, or a bolt. Nothing I really find all that practical. I much prefer metric, but and now that I've found metric equivalents, I would remake a recipe, hopefully, using metric and local supplier as well. And that's my Twitter. You can tweet at me. I'm not going to go into questions just yet because I've got enough time to jump across into some theory for UI automation. And then there might be time for questions. So this was a talk called Create Compelling Tests with a Risk-Based Approach, used at a conference or two. And I started this talk with some context of the previous company I worked at. So Tyro provides FPOS terminals. If you go to a cafe or whatnot and pay by card, there might be a Tyro terminal, and we might process that transaction. And I would say more credit card transactions means you're helping pay my wages, but that's not the case anymore. So I can't say more credit card transactions. They utilize a microservice backend, test-driven development, and paired programming. I felt like those last two practices helped raise the bar of quality, so we were able to engage testers on a slightly different level. So rather than just finding basic tests, getting into testing and going, your basic functionality doesn't work, send it back. You didn't even switch it on and see if it worked. We were able to engage, I think, on a more trying to encourage the teams to be better at testing rather than being responsible for testing, so activating on behalf of quality. And we had every machine set up to facilitate pair programming. So two keyboards, two mice, two monitors, all plugged into one laptop. So every machine was set up for collaboration. It was actually a really interesting environment to work in. Not everyone likes paired programming. Some people like to do things on their own, and it does take a little bit of an adjustment. And we generally only hire people who fit into this culture as well. So it makes it challenging, but it does create an interesting culture. So I'll get into the actual theory. So say you have an app, a banking app. Pretend these videos do work. There is a bug with Keynote that doesn't play video if it's plugged in via VGA. It does if it's plugged into HDMI. I've got to raise this bug with Apple one day. But imagine you're going through two-factor authentication with registration. You're transferring funds, accessing money. That's generally important. You might view past transactions and send a contact us request if something's gone wrong in the app, and change your PIN and do some other basic, app functionality. So say you've got these 5 features. You might want to map these flows onto a risk board to visually try to categorize how important things are. So for example, we put our frequency of use along our x-axis. We have our impact on the user if they're broken along our y-axis. And as an example, we have registration. Should have a fairly low frequency of use. People should only ever do this once, but it has a high impact if it's broken. If people can't register, shit's hit the fan, and we care about that feature. You might access transfer funds, more frequency, and also if people can't access their money. View transactions, you might not care so much because you might be able to give us a phone call. There might be a workaround to accessing that financial information. And you might only be accessing that maybe around tax time or just checking if the last transaction went through quickly. Contact us. Hopefully you can find our phone number on our website. So if it's broken in the app, who cares? And then your change PIN, if that is, should also not happen very often. Whoever's changed their PIN for their banking app. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I just leave it as the same one. So it generally has a low frequency of use. And logging in should happen all the time, and if they can't do that, then something's gone wrong. So we might mark these things in this quadrant with 3 stars to go. It's pretty important. We might want to automate testing here first, or do performance testing here first, or you could use this to visually communicate risks with other people within your team, with designers. I use this tool to collaborate around, to get a shared understanding of how important we thought features were, whether across developers, testers, and designers. This stuff maybe not so important. This stuff, 1 star, maybe even question why is it even in the app if it's even in that area. And we could also map other elements of risk as well. We might mark things with a red dot to say this has security impact. So it might, the end user might not care about this feature, but from a security point of view, we might want to have some extra automation or whatnot. So for an example, this is the one I used right next to my team. Has slightly more than 6 features, but you can see how it grows. And as new features get added to apps, you can renew the conversation around features. And I think that was all I wanted to go through around the theory of how you can use visual sticky notes and whiteboards to talk about risks in product and try and get everyone on the same page in regards to importance. There is more to this talk, but it doesn't really matter in this context. And now time for questions.
We have time. Oh, is it working? Oh, all right. We have time for 3 questions.
Precisely.
Yes, precisely 3. What? You all know about testing now? Elise? You don't work with her, you can ask.
Hey Sammy, thanks for the talk. How did you communicate your chart with the X and Y? How was that received by product owners and business, and did it sort of move to other teams than yours? Did it proliferate the company?
I guess short answer, no, and product owners, who are they? We had product managers, and I did get some feedback on a shared understanding with these features. Because we were one of the few teams that did front-end work, this visual representation made sense for us. I had one other tester run through that workshop with their team, to do their risk-based assessment on some of their back-end features. So it was used somewhat, and there are other testers still at Tyro who I think at least expressed an interest in continuing with that visual representation. So I don't think it completely got through the whole company. It was just an experiment that helped my team try to visualize things.
Anyone else? Ooh, oh, got exactly 3.
This is a very broad one, but I thought if you're going to recommend a team that's not doing much in the way of automated testing right now, what's the thing you think they should do the very first thing they should set out to do? Because they're probably not going to build Tappy McTapface.
So is the question was from a team that's not doing much automation. I assume they're looking into starting some automation. Yep. Where do they start? And I guess the question is that any written test should be adding value. If they're doing manual repetitive regression style testing, there's still benefits in doing that with a human eye, because a human eye can pick up oddities that a computer just can't. But if you want to build up a sense of confidence in your product as well, I think trying to find those high frequency of use features. Often when people talk about automation, they start with something small that's hardly ever used just to get something going, and then when things change, they're like, why do we even keep this test around? It's not adding any value. And but I guess being able to log into an app generally shouldn't change over the lifetime of the app, unless you're going through a complete app redesign, which we have done. So I would try and suggest finding those important features first to try and automate.
So I think that chart makes a lot of sense when I look at it. It's the first time I've seen it. Is that something you guys came up with, and how did you come up with it?
I had done some reading up on using a risk board or a visual representation of risk. So when we got our banking license about just under 2 years ago now, and we did a big bug bash before that test drive. So we got 100 odd developers and testers, put their tools down for an afternoon and try to break our bank features. And it was a way to get the developers who hadn't worked on the banking functionality exposed to that part of the business too. And but part of the prep for that full day activity or half day activity was I got together with a couple of testers and we started mapping out some of the risks we could see with our Big Bang Go Live approach. And so we were experimenting with how do we visualize this, and we placed this whiteboard next to the lift so that it should facilitate conversations around risk as people were coming and going out of the office as well. And we really liked that idea, so this was just a continuation on that. There are elements of this process that are also taken from user story mapping as well, which is a visualization of workflows using sticky notes. Slightly different structure, but you have color coordinated things to mean different things, and experiment with communicating things visually. We are visual people.